Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. In keeping with the theme of black self-defense, we need to have a serious talk about what happens when you decide that you have to be stupid. There's a way to do things and a way not to do things, and it's pretty easy to tell the difference. I, like everyone else among the new voices of black media, get a lot of people in my comments section who are clearly government agents. They post trash attacking other members of the new black media here. I guess they think that this is going to cause dissension among the ranks or whatever. And some of the more desperate agents will send us messages or even call into programs like TBAs or Tariqs and say stuff like, we need to go commit some act of violence. And then they ask, do you agree with that? This is the classic FBI playbook that they've always used. Get the target of their investigation to say some incriminating things about breaking the law, and then they got a case on you. Or at the very least, they have something that they can take to the white media and use to discredit you, which can be just as useful. It's classic COINTELPRO. Now, have you noticed that brothers like myself, TBA, Tariq, Mr. Harvey, and others, the old guard, the Gen Xers, have you ever noticed that we are very judicious with our words, both in public as well as in private? We don't go and tell you to go out and do anything, and we don't run around saying we're in charge of this. In fact, we do the exact opposite. We tell you the code is the leader, not us. And we also tell you learn to keep your mouth shut. And that's not just due to YouTube's racist censoring of our channels, it's also because this white supremacist government is listening. Their propaganda arm, the white media, certainly hears us, and they've attacked us regularly. You think these politicians don't know about us and our message? So that's one piece, the agents. But there's also another contingent that need to be checked. The attention-seeking morons who see the following that the new black media's earned for itself, and to them, our viewers are easy marks. So they come here, they say some off-the-wall nonsense, trying to get someone to notice them, and when people tell them that we don't do that kind of thing here, these fools immediately say, see, Professor Black Truth, he ain't nothing but an agent. Or some other new black media person they accuse of the same. They'll say that these people are not to be trusted. They come among us in places like this and tell you can't trust us. These people who have no track record, no identity, and no achievements. But they're quick to say everybody needs to listen to this loudmouth who's saying all this stupid stuff. Now, family, there's something we need to get straight. People who come to places like this do not think that they're going to be allowed to bring any immature, asinine TikTok, Instagram crap here. Social media, and that includes YouTube, by the way, brought a lot of good things in terms of connecting large numbers of people who ordinarily wouldn't have contact with each other. But one of the big problems that came along with social media is that we have the valedictorians in the same space as the class clowns. We have older people who have been around the block more than once fighting the enemy in the same room with some teenager or early 20s teeny bop who only thinks about getting some quickie attention. People who, for them, they think every place on the internet is nothing more than an opportunity for them to be seen. I have no patience for disruptive idiots who only come here because they're hoping to become some sort of half-brained influencer. These are the kinds of morons who will pose with guns online because they think they're competing to get views. They're desperate to go viral. And once they get that 10 or 12 extra views, they can't hold on to any of them, so what was that all for? Attention whores have no place here. This is a real war being waged against us. It's not entertainment. Now, I say all that to set up my next point. When you're fighting a war, you're an idiot if you go blabbing every little thing you know or intend to do. When a small group of oppressed people are fighting a larger, more powerful enemy, that smaller group can only win by being smarter and more disciplined. Key word there being disciplined. I remind you of the Army Field Manual's definition for discipline, which is when you put the goals of the organization ahead of your own personal desires. Now, you may desire to get attention, but is that the goal of the organization? Does it serve the organization's goals? Anyone who cannot subordinate their own impulses will ruin any organization they're a part of. Temperament is key to having effective members in your group. It's key to group discipline. Immaturity, impulsiveness, self-centeredness, these are the traits of an informant. Now, why do we, the elder statesmen, if you will, and I put that in quotes, of new black media, why do we take this so seriously? Because we've had a large number of examples, particularly in recent years, of people and groups who decided that they wanted to be famous. so they did any stupid thing they could to get people to notice them. For these chumps, getting attention is the same thing as being effective, but it's not. And that brings us to the Proud Boys, who ought to change their names to the Loud Boys. This gang of violent white supremacist trash were hoping to become the 21st century brown shirts. Their goal was to inspire white supremacists to assault people in the streets, and they took videos of themselves doing it, and they also made sure to show that they had friends in the police departments and political figures who weren't bashful about being seen with them. What they were doing wasn't dog whistling, it was blatant advocacy for starting violent altercations with anyone they disagreed with, and don't worry because the police know what we do and they approve of it. These are the irregular forces of white supremacy showing everyone that they have infiltrated police departments and these racist cops and politicians are endorsing the violence they carry out. But there were two fatal flaws for the Loud Boys. First, they made big undeniable targets of themselves. They confused the size of their membership with the power of their membership, and it don't work that way. Their second problem was that they thought it would be cute to have a person of color as their so-called leader, the self-identified white Latino Enrique Tarrio. Now, this was the Proud Boys doing what for them was cleverness. Enrique Tarrio himself showed that all he cared about was getting attention from his new white supremacist pals. He openly praised the Loud Boys' acts of violence, and about a month before the January 6th insurrection, he thought it would be a good idea to go attack a black church in Washington, D.C. He did it because that black church had put up a Black Lives Matters banner, and to show how much he hated black people, Enrique Tarrio tore the banner down and burned it, and then to show how stupid he was, he took pictures of himself committing his crime and then posted the pictures on the internet along with bragging about what he had done. Tarrio then went back to Miami after that stunt, but he didn't stay there long because the entire reason he had been in D.C. in the first place was as part of his effort to lay the groundwork for the January 6th insurrection. So on January 4th, 2021, Enrique Tarrio came back to D.C. to wait until time to storm the Capitol. But, unfortunately for Enrique, the D.C. Metro Police were also waiting for him. When he came back into town, he got immediately pulled over and arrested for attacking that church, and during the search, the police found gun magazines in his belongings. He tried to claim they belonged to somebody else, but the law doesn't care about that. So he got hit with a weapons charge on top of all of that, but of course he's not black, so he was immediately released on bond. And when he got out, did he lay low? After all, he was undoubtedly on law enforcement's radar now. He couldn't necessarily stay in D.C. for the January 6th insurrection. In fact, he didn't need to be drawing any attention to himself. While he had a lot of white supremacists with badges who were willing to protect him, there were also a lot of other people in law enforcement who just didn't want to be annoyed or bothered to have to fool with them. So intelligence would tell you to keep a low profile, right? Of course not. Enrique Tarrio was all about showing his white supremacist masters that he was more dedicated to their putrid cause than they were. So he stayed in D.C., and just to show there's no cure for stupid, he took a video crew with him this time because, hey, why make the Justice Department have to work to put you in prison? Why make the FBI go through the trouble and hassle of having to get a judge to sign off on a surveillance and wiretapping warrant? It's much more convenient for the feds if you go ahead and do the documentation of your crime yourself. Because that's exactly what he did. Tarrio had a meeting with another white Latino, Stuart Rhodes, who you'll recall is the founder and leader of the Oath Keepers, and they had a meeting in a garage where they met with another white Latino, Bianca Gracia, who was the head of the group Latinos for Trump. And so you had the conspirators of the January 6th insurrection making a video of themselves plotting to overthrow the government because, hey, toppling the U.S. government can't be much harder than having a brawl with some Antifa activists in California, right? Well, as it turned out, toppling the world's most powerful nation was a lot harder than winning a street fight with some scrawny randos in New York or San Francisco. But hey, members of the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers got to take some cool selfies of themselves storming the Capitol, and that made it all worth it, right? Enrique eventually had to face the music for the church vandalism case hanging over his head, so in July of 2021, he was forced to plead guilty to destruction of property in that church vandalism case, as well as the weapons charge. I mean, it's not like he could deny doing it. He had posted pictures of himself committing his crimes on the internet. He was sentenced to only 5 months in jail, and in January of 2022 he was released and Tarrio went back to Miami, but he didn't stay a free man for very long because on March 8, 2022 he was arrested on federal charges, ranging from conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding to destruction of government property, but those charges were just placeholders, something to get the ball rolling while the feds put together the real charges they intended to put on him a month later, seditious conspiracy. And this time, he wouldn't be going home. In May 2022, a judge ruled that he be kept in jail pending the outcome of the trial. And then, a few weeks later, the Justice Department formally indicted Enrique Tarrio for seditious conspiracy. Now, it should be noted the Loud Boys had long since stopped pretending that this guy was ever their leader. They got their cheap laughs by acting like liberals cared that they had a brown-skinned Latino as their alleged head honcho, but after that they were done with them. And speaking of people who didn't care about Tarrio, the same white right-wing groups like Fox News who cheered on the insurrection were not about to advocate for him to be let out of prison. Marjorie Taylor Greene and the rest of her clown car of conservatives like Lauren Boebert weren't thinking about Enrique Tarrio at all. Greene, Boebert, and the rest of the congressional Republicans were too busy saying that the white terrorists who overran the Capitol were political prisoners, and that the GOP wanted those people to be released. So Enrique Tarrio found out the hard way that he had been played for a fool. All his shameless sucking up to these racists, getting himself arrested, and then facing the prospect of years in prison only to be abandoned by the same people who routinely gave a wink and a nod to him just a little while earlier. And for what? What did Enrique Tarrio throw his life away for? Nothing. And just last week, Tarrio and his other Proud Boy defendants were convicted of seditious conspiracy. Those guys just keep taking L after L after L. It's like the saying goes, every victory fuels the next victory, and every defeat fuels the next defeat. Now, why did I go through all that? Why a brief history of Enrique Tarrio's involvement with the January 6th insurrection? It was to make this point. On the day of the insurrection, Enrique Tarrio was feeling himself. So much so that in the middle of the insurrection, while the riot was in full swing, he went on social media and told everyone, "Make no mistake, we did this." Really? Well, that sure saved the feds the trouble of having to sweat a confession out of him, and that quote was not only used in the white media for months leading up to his indictment, but the Justice Department predictably used it against Tarrio at his trial, and that social media post was the main evidence that convicted him. See, for attention whores in their tiny minds, they blur the line between their attention whoring and the real-world consequences that go along with it. To them, all that matters is getting views. If you're getting views, then you're winning. Jail is temporary. Going viral is forever. But of course, in the real world, they've got it exactly backwards. You can trend for a few minutes, but spend months, or in this case, years in prison. Now, when you look at groups who actually do topple governments, they don't go on social media. The U.S. toppled one regime after the next in South America and Africa during the 20th century, and they didn't give any of those groups any warning. Nobody really knew who was doing it to them. Sure, they knew it was the U.S. behind it, but the U.S. didn't give them any targets to go after. No warnings, no red flags. It was like fighting a shadow, which is why it worked. And the U.S. continued this pattern into the 21st century. Look at the so-called color revolutions overseas, or the protests against the Chinese government in Hong Kong. The U.S.'s fingerprints are all over those operations, but by not being blatant about it, the U.S. gets to maintain the necessary illusion that America's not sponsoring these revolts. Why, these are grassroots movements from the people themselves. The Navy SEALs carry out countless missions, but only a handful of them have become known to the public. In war, the most valuable trait you can have is to not be seen. Now, a lot of you will say that Enrique Tarrio went overboard with his attention whoring. Of course, he was going to wind up in prison, you'll say. He was doing the most to make a target out of himself. Well, there was no chance he would ever moderate his behavior. He had shown on multiple occasions that he was a professional attention whore, and so is Stuart Rhodes. They were trying to be social media stars, not revolutionaries. I would love to say that they were dry snitching on themselves, but when you take video of yourself plotting a coup, and then during the middle of the coup, stop long enough to say, "Hey, this was all me, baby," There's nothing dry about that. That was just a full-on confession. Enrique Tarrio made the government's case for them. He did it to himself over and over and over again because there's no cure for stupid. I keep repeating that phrase because there's a lot of folks who try to come around here acting the exact same way. I run the agents and the immature big mouths I see off my channel. Black people in general and black men in specific are too eager to try to impress the world by telling everything we know, everything we've got, and everything we intend to do. It's kind of hard to maintain the element of surprise when you do that. On a side note, Gavin McInnes, the Canadian white supremacist who founded the Proud Boys, he's not in jail. You want to know why? Because years ago he decided to distance himself from the very group that he founded when he saw that they were attracting too much attention. Same way that he also distanced himself from Vice, another group that he was involved with. That's why he's still making his asinine videos, and Enrique Tarrio is staring down the barrel of some serious prison time. Even if Enrique does get time served, which he won't, but follow me here, he's damaged goods now. Political movements are all about momentum, and when you're locking up the leaders of these groups and locking up their members and dragging them through court, you're disrupting their momentum. The government knows exactly how that game works because that's what they did to black people in the 60s and 70s. They had black leaders killed, locked up, driven into exile. Do that enough times, and the movement will crumble. It doesn't pay to advertise, not when you're calling yourself making some big ugly moves like the Loud Boys did. So both the Oath Keepers and the Loud Boys have destroyed themselves. They chose the wrong leaders, to be sure, but they also chose the wrong tactics, too. There's a reason why I keep telling you phrases like run silent, run deep. The best way to win a fight is to pop up when your opponent least expects it. All the loud rah-rah stuff is what weak failures do. People who are trying to be the big man for all of 3 seconds, but they're not going to bust a grape and they're not going to get anything done either. Why do we, the new voices of black media, operate the way we do? Because this isn't about winning some contest to see who can get the most views, or who can go viral, or who can be trending on Twitter. And it's not about impressing people by telling everything we have on our minds. When it comes to social movements, natural selection has a way of weeding out the unfit and the unworthy. And that's the lesson to take away from all this. People who only want attention will certainly get it, and they'll also get themselves in big trouble, too. There was another right-wing gang of street thugs who liked to chase attention. They called themselves Vanguard America. In fact, it was a member of Vanguard America who murdered Heather Heyer during the Charlottesville riot. That act put an end to not only Vanguard America, but also the alt-right. Vanguard America has since tried to rebrand itself as Patriot Front. And how has their rebranding effort gone? Not so good. In 2021, they made headlines for getting themselves run out of Philadelphia. They've taken to running around in moving vans, which makes it easier for them to flee town, I suppose. And last year, they were hoping to make a big splash by disrupting a gay pride event, but all that got disrupted was them. 31 of them were arrested, and that was the last time of any real note that those guys were in the white media headlines. People who make it a point to be all loud and noisy when they move, usually it's because they just want to be seen. They make some noise, they get some people to look at them, and it makes them feel important, and then after that they seem to lose interest in whether or not they achieve anything worthwhile because, hey, they got noticed. The Loud Boys and the Oath Keepers, like the alt-right and Vanguard America before them, aren't gone. But the leaders of the government know that when an organization takes a big enough hit to its membership or its prestige, that can be a fatal blow. So you better keep message discipline at the forefront of your mind when it comes to the black grassroots. There are things that happen that you don't know about, and that's because when too many people know a secret, it's not a secret anymore. These white supremacist organizations have the luxury of allowing their more annoying members to be locked up. White power is not based on whether you have some social media morons causing public disturbances. But the Loud Boys and the Oath Keepers members will have to move on and form some other group. Sure, they can try to hold on to the mangled remains of their present organizations, like the KKK before them did, but eventually they will have to move on to some other group because this one has been damaged. And that's no way to win a war. So the next time you see some fool posting something stupid in the comments section, or you got somebody saying that, well, unless we're doing some big act of, well, lawlessness, then we ain't really doing nothing serious, you just keep these alt-right rejects in mind. Follow in their footsteps, and you'll wind up in the same place. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Joel Hunton, Jeffrey Williams, Frederica Moore, Rufus Reed, and Keith B. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.